Good morning to you all, and good
Hi.
afternoon to you all, and you are all welcome to the Cybersecurity Prevention and Recovery webinar. Thank you to all our guests for showing up, and so we will jump right into it. Um, to all those joining us, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. So we'll give a couple more minutes, like 3 to 5 minutes, for more people to jump in, and then we will promptly commence. So grab a drink, a snack, and we will commence in short order. All right, so we can comment. So this is how the program is going to go. There are 4 panelists. Each will speak for 20 minutes. Then we'll have a Q&A, and the audience members can submit all their questions and comments and all that. Kindly drop your comments in the chat. We will duly respond to them. So first, we will deal with the central law in Ghana, which covers cybersecurity. That is the new Cybersecurity Act, 2020 Act 1036, presented by me on behalf of Cranton and Cranton legal advisors. Second, we will do a glimpse at the international scope of cybersecurity delivered by Mr. Desmond Israel, also for 20 minutes. Third, we have a look at the local prosecution of cybercrime in Ghana, delivered by our second guest, the head of cybercrime division of the Ghana Police Service, Mr. Emmanuel Jebi. And lastly, we get a look at what technologies we can guard ourselves with cybertech, presented by Cybertech CEO, Mr. Ben Tego. All right, so we have a panel of very knowledgeable, very fine gentlemen for you today. So a warm good afternoon to you all, gentlemen and ladies. And without further ado, we will begin. So first, an overview of the Cybersecurity Act 2020, Act 1038. I will be giving a broad overview of the Act as well as its predominant features, right? And the goal of my presentation on the Act is to make the provisions and the legislation, which can be very abstract, it can feel very alien to the normal person. I want to make it feel as relatable to the average person as possible. So I'm going to support my speech with a lot of real world analogies to help us see the practicality in this, right? All right, so the Cybersecurity Act, why does this even matter? Why are we talking about this? All right, so picture the internet like this, right? The internet is a decentralized form of reality. So where you had banks formerly, you now have banking apps, right? Where you had stores, now you use online stores. Where you had offices, you might use a website, right? Now, most people don't really understand how the cyberspace operates beyond a basic level of how to use their device, right? And for example, the average adult knows how to go onto Google, but they couldn't possibly explain to you how a web page works, right? So that is how most people use the internet today, right? But it's a place where you're putting the bulk of our knowledge, pictures, videos, money, purchases, while having little knowledge of its deep functionality, which is like having a bank or a house or a store and not knowing how the front doors or the gates work, right? And so that is why this is necessary to explore, right? So what is cybercrime? We will start with the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, which is the most significant international treaty on the matter. It defines cybercrime as the intentional action of illegal access, interception, data interference, system interference, misuse of devices, computer-related forgery, fraud, and other offenses related to copyright infringement and other such neighboring rights. Section 97 of the Cybersecurity Act defines cybersecurity to mean the state in which a computer or computer system is protected from unauthorized access or attack to ensure that a computer system remains functional and operational. Now, this might seem like something that's far away from the lives of most people, like places in Ghana, right? But the reality is quite different. For example, in 2019, you had the official website of the most popular radio station in Ghana, arguably, Joy FM's myjoyonline.com. It was hacked, right? And the front page was taken over by rather disturbing messages. The hack appeared to be perpetrated by a person calling themselves satanic forces, and it lasted for about 1 hour. They were never found up to this day, right? And whoever did that is still out there, while websites of governmental institutions, banks are run on similar software as My Joy Online was. So this is the kind of thing we're dealing with. On a macro scale, right? The World Forum Global Risk Report has estimated that the cost of cybercrime would reach $6 trillion in 2021, which is higher than the GDP of all African countries combined, right? Moreover, cybercrime cost Ghana approximately $230 million from 2016 to 2018, right? So it is against this background that the Ghanaian government passed the Cybersecurity Act. All right, so in 2018, something was established in Ghana called the Cybersecurity Center. It was established under the National Communications Authority under the leadership of Dr. Entry Bosiakun, right, to build a framework for passage of cybersecurity law. And so in furtherance of that, the center was tasked to build a proper framework protecting critical information infrastructure. And that is how the Cybersecurity Act 2020 became law in December 2020 after receiving presidential assent. All right, so let's dive into the main features of the Cybersecurity Act 2020 and why the provisions came about. All right, so the first significant feature is the establishment of the Cybersecurity Authority. Section 2 of the Act establishes the Ghanaian Cybersecurity Authority, or GCA for short, and the authority is charged with the protection of critical information infrastructure, regulating all cyber activities and promoting the development of cybersecurity in the country, as well as protecting children on the internet and other related matters. Why does this matter? And why do we need a body like this, right? Okay, so on the 31st of October of this year, news broke that the ex-Prime Minister of the UK, Liz Truss's phone had been hacked by Russian forces, right? The cyber spies were believed to have gained access to top secret exchanges with key international partners, as well as private conversations, such as hints as to who bombed Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, right? Now, take such a scenario. If such information on her phone was on a piece of paper on a table behind thick concrete walls and the might of the UK security forces, it would take a force of many thousand, right, to get even one of her communications. But online, there are no walls that your army can guard. There are no seas that your navy can patrol. There's no airspace for your air force to prowl, right? You need a line of defense in the virtual battlefield. And that is the central idea behind the Ghana Cybersecurity Authority. Look at it like the armed forces of the internet, basically, right? So the authority is tasked to perform its duty in conjunction with various institutions, right? So the Act mandates that other regulatory bodies in the country shall cooperate with the authority, ensuring that the Ghanaian cyberspace is protected, right? And this helps reduce the burden on these bodies because it's being handed over to someone who has that as their sole responsibility. All right, so we've seen why the body is needed. Now, let's see the powers that the Act gives it. So the Act establishes an 11-member board under Section 5 to control and regulate the authority. It also establishes a joint cybersecurity committee, which is basically a panel of 18 individuals across various sectors of the country, which are appointed by the president to serve on the committee to consolidate information across sectors broadly. Also, the Director General of the authority shall preside over their meetings as provided by Act 1038. All right, so the Act further creates two arms of the cybersecurity authority. Take it like how there is the military, but there is the Navy for the sea, and then there is the armed forces for the land, right? And then there's the Air Force for the air. It is the same thing with the cybersecurity authority. One, you have the national and sectoral computer emergency response teams. So the Act establishes in Section 41 the National Computer Emergency Response Team, right? And they are responsible for responding to cybersecurity incidents, and they have oversight over the sectoral computer emergency response team, right? And these two bodies receive direction from the cybersecurity authority. All right, so the response teams are designated for all the sectors of public life. So you have response teams for the public sector, the banking sector, finance, telecommunication, energy, utilities, the military, national security, and so on, right? And secondly, you have the cybersecurity incident monitoring and response team. And this group ensures monitoring and response of all cybersecurity threats. All right, the next major feature of the new Cybersecurity Act is critical information infrastructure. And if you pay attention to the provisions in the Act, special emphasis is placed on so-called CIIs, critical information infrastructure. So why is there a special section dedicated to this in the Act? All right, so in October of 2022, senior US government officials revealed that there had been major Russian hacks against airports in the United States, right? In October, there were also attacks against the United States Treasury where the currency, which controls the money supply in the United States. Thankfully, these hacks just caused minor inconveniences and targeted non-essential systems. But the most interesting thing here is why the Russian agents chose to target those services, right? It is because it costs little to no shedding of blood to achieve that, right? You have to expend almost no manpower. And two, they were more vulnerable than other spots of the United States to attack, right? So we need to keep in mind that that at the pace technology is growing, more and more government departments are going paperless. They are putting their databases online, like courts are doing that, the banks are doing that, right? So what might be a hack that causes a minor inconvenience in 2022, right? In 2032 might be an incident which brings the system to its knees. Okay, right? And so you need to get ahead of it, which is exactly what the new act does. So the act provides that a computer system or network can be designated as critical information infrastructure by the minister, right? And CIIs are a computer system or computer systems that the minister may designate, right? And so the Cybersecurity Authority is charged with preparing a list of all these CIIs and to audit them periodically. The Minister of Communications, Honorable Ursula Owusu, current Minister for Communications, has already designated 13 sectors of the Ghanaian economy as critical information infrastructure. These are national security, information communication technology, water, food, agriculture, banking, finance, manufacturing, transportation, mining, education, energy, health, and government e-services. Also, the Act places legal obligations on all proprietors of critical information infrastructure, and it issues harsh punishment under Section 14 for those who endeavor to get unauthorized access to these CIIs. Also, the regulatory regime is projected to create over 1,000 jobs for Ghanaian individuals in recruiting people to fill and perform these roles. The next key feature is on authorization, accreditation, and certification. Sections 49 and 50 of the Act make it mandatory for cybersecurity service providers to get a permit from the authority before they can provide any service to their clients. So the authority also has the power to revoke the licenses of a cybersecurity service provider if they act contrary to the rules and the regulations of the authority, and is also in charge of certifying their products to make sure that they are up to scratch for the market. Next, we go to the criminal powers that the new Cybersecurity Act grants the Cybersecurity Authority. And there's some very interesting provisions here. One, the Act permits various investigative agencies to make ex parte applications to the High Court for a production order to get access to subscriber information. And so in the age of dummy social media accounts and bots, such as was seen in the meddling which went on in the 2016 US elections. This is especially essential, and the Act is exhibiting some foresight here, right? So in granting this order, the High Court is obligated to consider the conditions laid down in section 69.3 and 70 of the Act before they grant said application. So there is some due process to address concerns about privacy. Section 69.2 provides that any investigative officer who makes an application shall demonstrate to the satisfaction of the judge that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the subscriber information associated with a specified communication is reasonably required for a specific criminal investigation. The act also makes it possible for the authority to use a court order to take down or block illegal content, which is harmful to national security or the rights of the individual. This is in section 87. Also, the Cybersecurity Authority has the power to freeze assets, right? Where on an application by the authority, the court is satisfied that the authority has reasonable grounds to suspect that a person has committed or is committing an offense or has been involved in a crime, the court may by order restrain that person from disposing of their assets, and it can also compel the person to make a declaration of their assets in full. Also, the Act creates an industry forum, Section 81. It establishes an industry forum that is simply a platform which brings the key stakeholders in the industry together to discuss matters of common interest to the industry. And finally, we have laws on child protection and against sexual extortion. Why do we need this in our laws, right? So with the rise of social media with closed off encrypted groups like you see on WhatsApp, Telegram, Discord, where it's not like the usual format like you see on Facebook where everyone can see what everyone else posts, right? You have the rise of social media that are enclosed in groups. It has made it easier for nefarious individuals like child predators and perverts to congregate and proliferate very harmful content. Like just 4 days ago, the social media app Discord reported that between January and June of this year, they banned 1.8 million accounts and groups, right? And these bans were handed out for issues relating to child safety and exploitative and unsolicited content. So to guard against this, the Cybersecurity Act 2020 protects children against indecent exposure, cyber stalking, sexual abuse, and sexual extortion. And the highlight is that it secures sexual partners against issues of non-consensual sharing of sexual pictures and recordings and the threat to publish such pictures and recordings. And it's important to note, this is the first law in Ghana to criminalize the threat of publishing sexual pictures and recordings that were exchanged between consensual spouses or sexual partners. This will go a long way to deter people from extorting money from their prior partners in the name of revenge, right? Such as happened in April of this year, where a student, a 24-year-old girl called Damilia, allegedly in the UK, she jumped 80 feet to her death a week after her boyfriend sent a video of her performing a sex act to a friend. And this ex-boyfriend admitted to releasing the footage because she had been spreading dangerous rumors about him, right? And unfortunately, this is not an uncommon phenomenon in Africa, right? Popular Nigerian musician Tiwa Savage and Ghanaian rapper Tiffany had their sex tape leaked a couple of years ago, right? So this act has a lot of features which are very up with the times and follow the trends that are going on. Okay, so finally, what punishments are there for non-compliance with the Cybersecurity Act? Section 94 provides that an individual or agency that neglects to conform with the various provisions commits an offense and can be convicted to fines from between 250 to 50,000 penalty units. That is around 30 to 600,000 cedis, or a term of imprisonment between 6 months to 25 years. And I believe these sanctions are harsh enough to deter people from tampering with critical information infrastructure and things like that. So in conclusion, we have a very robust act which is up to the times, and I believe it is up to the task to protect us all. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. All right then. So we will move on to our next guest. And with this next guest, we will be looking at the international scene of cybersecurity. And so my next guest is none other than the illustrious Mr. Desmond Israel. He is a lawyer called to the bar in Ghana and a data privacy / information security practitioner. He specializes in open source intelligence gathering and security techniques with over a decade and a half of industry experience. He is the founder and lead consultant of Information Security Architects Limited, who is a Rapid7 Gold partner, delivering enterprise defensive cybersecurity solutions to tier 1 banks. He holds the role of anti-money laundering reporting officer and compliance lead for HALG's Financial Technologies Limited. Desmond was an adjunct lecturer with the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration for IT contracts and ethical hacking and vulnerability analysis. He is also a GW Merit Law Officer pursuing Masters in Law in National Security and Cybersecurity, where he specializes on law and policy for national security within the context of cybersecurity, cyber warfare, information privacy, artificial intelligence. The list goes on, and the blockchain at the George Washington University Law School of Washington, D.C. He's currently a researcher for the renowned XR Security Initiative's Child Safety Net Framework Guidelines in California, United States. And so without further ado, I will leave you in the hands of Mr. Desmond Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. I didn't know you were going to go on and on. I need my audience to follow, so I'm going to use the presentation aid. Just a single slide, which gathers the conversation the way it would be more organized and easier to chew on. So, of course, the task is to look at the conversation from an international perspective. And clearly, we were sort of discussing cybercrime, but of course, from your initial presentation, which is a very good one on the context of the Cybersecurity Act, I also realized that we were also talking about critical national infrastructure, which actually leads us to conversations around, the possibility of cyber warfare and all that. So just to throw that off the way and come back, there's a very thin line between, a threshold between when cybercrime, grows or manifests into cyber warfare. And I'm sure probably during the question time, I could get the opportunity to do that. For context, the international value for cybercrime is 10.5 trillion, expected that by 2025, the world will hit that amount of cost. I think for anyone who is interested in the subject, the question you ask yourself is, what does this mean? Well, I'm going to tell you it means that cybercrime actually becomes the third largest economy after the US and China. That's a big deal. But what's the international approach today? Two things are involved. Raise the cost, raise the cost for the commission of cybercrime, because now it's easy for them to get the tools, the softwares, build the scripts and the schemes to execute these things. So raise the cost. So of course, basic cyber hygiene, and also trying to put a few things in place in terms of your cybersecurity posture, and then increase the risk. Is it easier for them to commit the crime and then move away to another jurisdiction without being, prosecuted? If it is easier, then someone who commit the crime in, say, Togo and move to maybe Sierra Leone, knowing that he's not going to be, punished, or commits a crime in the US and leaves to Mexico, or commits a crime in Russia and leaves to Iran. So the world is looking at a posture where you are going to increase the risk by which cybercrime, the commission of cybercrime is made. So that leads me to the assignment for today. 3 areas of conversation: the landscape, the stakeholders, and the cross-border recovery. And from the notes, the cross-border recovery was supposed to look at data and, of course, monies that are involved. So we'll discuss that. Let's start off with the landscape. Now, the landscape is made up of the threats and the threat actors, but because I am discussing enforcement, you could see that I have actually grouped that into one and shaded it, just so it doesn't get into the way of discussing enforcement, because the landscape for enforcement deals with the laws itself, it deals with the technical capabilities, and it deals with collaboration, which I'm going to break down one after the other. But when you look at the landscape in terms of threats and threat actors, that is where you are able to build a better understanding of what actually becomes a crime, and at what threshold that crime, like we say in international law, the use of force would come into play, disrupting maybe a governmental services or interfering with maybe critical national infrastructure, and then requiring the other party or the other state actor to actually also use equal measure, of course, under the UN Security Council regulations, on what you can also do when such a thing happens to you. So from ransomware to sextortion to sex trafficking to direct hack into critical national infrastructure, all these things are threat landscapes that you need to consider when you are dealing with the issue of cybercrime. But like I said, there's a threshold between when the crime now becomes an issue of state-to-state combat, aka cyber warfare. The threat actors are numerous. They are individuals. They are solidly well-built international rings, okay, which are well-funded. And within the African context, for those who are connecting from East Africa, I'm sure you know about Fogbombo. Fogbombo has been an international headache for most African countries trying to track down on these sort of online crimes. And fortunately, somewhere in Rwanda, they were part of that ring was caught, and I'll discuss that later. Concerning the laws, Jesse touched on the Budapest Convention. Of course, I agree with him. A most authoritative, well-known go-to document when it comes to international cybercrime legislation. But I'm also bringing you news. There is the UN, in fact, there's a resolution was passed at the General Assembly of the UN for the UN Cybercrime Treaty to come into play. There are a few challenges with the treaty itself. Stakeholders and professionals and experts are discussing components of it. Especially one thing I can share with you is there's no clear definition what a cybercrime is, because in one point it criminalizes even security, the act of security researchers like myself, and so there's a whole global conversation as to what that should be. Few proposals, from India and other state, Egypt and other member state actors under the UN are all under consideration. Of course, you can look at it from the regional point, AU, Malabo Convention. You can look at the ECOWAS directive, and you can look at other regional bodies. All these things are part of the ecosystem when it comes to legislation. And they are really, really important, because when I get to the area of collaboration, you probably appreciate why these international laws are really crucial. And I know for most lawyers, especially, those who are not practicing in international law, there is always the issue of enforcement. Yes, there is, and there's still, it hasn't changed. Well, so for the laws, I just want you to focus on international laws. Usually look at illegal access, okay, which cuts across a broad number of cyber crimes. It looks at forgery. It also looks at fraud. It looks at unlawful interception of maybe data and traffic. And of course, it looks at other crimes which are wholly or partly committed using electronic means. So you know of extortion. And when you, like Jesse explained, when you bring it into the context of people holding digital videos of others and threatening them with publication if they don't pay money, that moves us into sextortion, and then it becomes a cyber crime. So just to explain to you on that angle, you know about sex trafficking, right? When you move it into online platforms or using online engagements to achieve that same crime, then you are wholly or partly committing a mainstream crime, but then this time it is a cyber crime, and that would allow cyber crime legislations that are within both the international context and the national context to come into force. And technical capabilities is pretty straightforward. You can only deal with laws, and the world over enforcement is a big deal. It's a big issue of conversation as to what the capabilities would be. It is not as easy as breaking down doors. Sometimes the crimes are hidden in electronic systems, you know, so you need technical capabilities to be able to do a very good job. And this includes intelligence gathering, the possibility of threat response, forensics, you know, the ability to do investigations seamlessly and flawlessly. And of course, to have cybercrime ops as in operations. And clearly, referencing the Cybersecurity Act of Ghana, you're talking about the setup for incident response and things like that. Of course, these are all, you know, the legislative positions, of course, which comes out of policy. And of course, they would require budget and support to be able to materialize them when it comes to technical capabilities. And then there is collaboration, big deal. You need it for 3 reasons. There is collaboration on the international front to harmonize the laws. Like the example I gave, you don't want a crime. Take this scenario. Gentleman sits in Accra, goes on the dark web, and then buys an exploit. An exploit is actually a program that you can use to maybe attempt to hack or attempt to intrude or intercept on an electronic system. So he buys an exploit from the dark web, usually called the underground, okay? He pays in cryptocurrency, sold to him by an exploit developer who probably lives in Romania, but is hosting this exploit on an Iranian server, right? I've given you 3 jurisdictions already. The guy who bought the exploit is sitting in Ghana. The one who developed the exploit is in Romania, but he's hosted it in an Iranian server and he sold it off. Gentleman in Ghana buys it, he ships the exploit to another gentleman or another ring in, say, Nigeria, okay, which has access to retail shops in Dubai. They run this exploit in Dubai and they scheme information on Dubai retail shops. And then they ship it to, say, Mexico and have them to clone ATM cards with this information. And then the clone cards are maybe magnetic strip. So they'll move it into a jurisdiction where a magnetic strip is allowed. So a place like the United States. And then they scheme these accounts through maybe Visa-enabled ATM machines. How many jurisdictions have I given you already? More than 6 for the commission of one crime. So if you don't have a harmonized national laws, which is what the international collaboration is about, you're going to have challenges trying to prosecute some of these cases. And then you come to the improvement of investigation. You may not have the resources, but another state would have the resources. So you can leverage on that away from the diplomatic ties and the issue of committee. Place like the Interpol helps with some of these things, you know, so that's where you need this collaboration more importantly. And that is what actually happens on the ground. And of course, to enable cooperations between states. And from international law perspective, when you sign a treaty, you are saying that I want to be part of it. When you sign a convention, you are saying that I want to be part of it. When you accede to a protocol, you are saying that you want to be part of it. So that is the landscape in a nutshell when it comes to, you know, cybercrime, you know, cyber security. in that context. Let's move to the stakeholders. I'll try to be as brief as I can. Now, in the stakeholdership, I also group it into categories that would help appreciate it better. There is the policy and lawmaking requirements, okay? So every state becomes a stakeholder. So if I, for instance, acceded to the Budapest, I'm a stakeholder to the Budapest Convention, and I have to make sure that the necessary legislations within the Budapest Convention, which must come into my national laws, it gets ratified and becomes enforceable, would be done. So if the Ghanaian parliament is not forthcoming with that, then that would be a stakeholder gap, as an example, right? India did not accede to the Budapest Convention. They are actually considering it. Russia did not accede to it for what they consider national security reasons. So these are the real challenges when it comes to that. But just so you understand, national lawmaking bodies, national policy and lawmaking bodies are part of the stakeholders when it comes to the fight against cybercrime and cyber warfare. And regional bodies as well. The AU I mentioned earlier, ECOWAS directive I mentioned earlier. More importantly is the Asian Pacific law, which is the anti-telecom and the online fraud law, which is also, sort of like a regional one for those within the APAC region. And of course, the global lawmaking bodies, the UN, the EU Council, or the Council of the European Union, and African Union, and of course, Middle East, North Africa, and it goes on and on. Any body you can identify which has the potential of lawmaking is also a stakeholder within the space. And of course, law enforcement, the bigger chunk. If we make the law, we must enforce them. So law enforcement, we have it in two categories: the international law enforcement and of course state law enforcement. On the international front, the most prominent we can speak of now, which is really engaged in this fight, is the Interpol, right? But I'll tell you what, the strength of the Interpol really lies on the state's participation. For instance, the Interpol operates through what they call the NCBs, right? And these are the, the National Central Bureaus, where you actually assign local law enforcement authorities working within the jurisdiction, the local jurisdictional laws, but collaborating with other member states who also have NCBs established within their countries, right? And you have about 922 members of the Interpol, and all of them are connected through what the Interpol calls the I-247, giving real-time information and updating it. In one research that we are looking at, we've already come to the conclusion that the strength of the Interpol depends also on the strength of the member states. If a member state is not contributing too much or the relevant information in terms of the happenings on the ground for them, the Interpol database would be lacking when it comes to that particular country. But you can leverage on another country to be able to know if a particular crime committed has any rings within that country. And that is the strength of joining or being part of the Interpol. Of course, one of the critical points is investigative support that the Interpol has and gives through what they call the RIACM. Is actually regional investigative and analytic case management, and that brings them all together. And there are over 124 million police records, okay, to support the Interpol's work, and it's still growing. Of course, one of the highlights, which is most relevant to this conversation, is the Interpol Cyber Fusion Center, which actually allows member states to bring in their cybersecurity experts to collaborate in towards the fight for cyber crimes. Then you have the state police, or what you call the state machinery, state enforcement machinery. This includes the police, right? Regulatory agencies, depending on what is involved. For instance, if personal data is involved, you will not expect your data protection regulatory authority to be out of the investigation, because they have some mandate in law to ensure some of these happening. Of course, the giant of it would be your cybersecurity authority, right? And then there are also industry regulators like your central bank, like your investment regulator, and then it goes on and on and on. The reason why you do these things, as we see from international point of view, is that it helps in tracking, because crimes are committed usually in silos. It may be a banking fraud, it may be an investment fraud, it may be a hack on a critical infrastructure. Okay, so it depends on where the commission of the crime is happening and who we bring on board. So we see all these people as part of the stakeholders when it comes to looking at it from a state or national point of view. And of course, intelligence gathering bodies. You can't take them out of the picture. Some of the crime are so in-depth, so well executed, such that you cannot only use police machinery to do that. You might require National Investigative Bureau, you might require state surveillance, state security agencies coming, state intelligence agencies coming in. And that is why most states have Security and Intelligence Acts, okay? And across the world, from China through Ghana to Nigeria to the US to Mexico, look at the legislative landscape. Almost everybody has a state Security and Intelligence Act to make sure that they will be able to assert some of these enforcement authorities. Of course, how do you assert jurisdiction? I think it's a relevant point to look at this juncture. When do you say that, oh, we can take over this case because we have the jurisdiction to? Look at it from 4 points. 4 points. And I know we might be running out of time, but look at it from 4 points. One would be the person committing the crime. So if it's a Ghanaian who committed the crime, the state of Ghana will have jurisdiction over that person. And then look at the place of commission of the crime. Where was the crime committed? Crime was committed in the US, so the person was arrested in the US. The US will have jurisdiction. The systems that were impacted during the commission of the crime, and look at it from 2 angles: the object and the subject of attack, right? The subject of attack would be where the attack is meant to be, and the object of attack will be where they leapfrog to. So maybe a system administrator's device was hacked in a central bank, and then it was used in engaging crime within the central bank. That system administrator probably was on vacation in Dubai, right? So it was within the Dubai jurisdiction. It got hacked, and they were able to maybe make a lateral movement or jump from there into systems that he was connected to, say, back in country X, right? So you will see that there are 2 jurisdictions involved, and that is where you look at the object and the subject of attack. They are very, very important distinction when it comes to cybercrime. And then, of course, victims that are affected, right? So where you have maybe a sextortion ring who brings people from Albania into, say, Mexico, and then, take videos, explicit videos of them, and then publish it on pornography servers in, say, the United States. You see that the victims are Albanian victims. So if the Albanian authority has the machinery to execute these prosecution, they may request that the parties be brought before them to execute this jurisdiction. Of course, if there's going to be enforcement, you will need the court's intervention. That's where we have judicial intervention and oversight. And it's pretty straight and simple as taking the criminal cases to court and having it prosecuted. And just so you see how the international plane looks at it, I'd like you to refer to some of the databases. There's a database which is actually hosted by the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, okay? It's called the Sherlock database. You would see a lot of case law built there when it comes to some of the commission of these crimes and how the courts dealt with it. So just to throw in 3 of that for you, the US versus Garcia has to do with cyber sex trafficking with the scenario that I gave you, okay? So Garcia is in the US with his accomplices. They managed to go out of jurisdiction, get young ladies to buy into their scheme of, being nude models. But actually what they were doing was creating pornography content out of it and then hosting it on US servers and making profit of that. They were actually convicted for some of these cybercrime, including the use of force and use of force in sex trafficking and then fraud as well. Look at Rwanda versus Miruki and others, where the Rwanda Investigative Bureau actually took down Fort Bombo, one of East Africa's notorious cybercrime ring, and they also got in, they cooked up a scheme to be able to actually engaged the Equity Bank of Rwanda through an ATM fraud. They had 26 ATM targets. They managed to go through with about 8 of them, if I'm not mistaken, and they made about over 2 million Rwandan in Rwandan currency. But what happened? There was a tip-off, which is where you and I also come into the picture when it comes to stakeholders. There was a tip-off through an electronic communication, and Equity Bank gave this tip-off to the RIB, who later went into investigation quickly and arrested the gentleman and his accomplices. And of course, if you look at Argentina versus Raul D. Murchison, also had to do with unauthorized gambling, which was connected to international ring and was used to fleece people of their earnings. So there are a lot of efforts within this space. If you were to discuss this further, you would also look at the challenges as well. But for now, the task is to give you a good impression, and good here is used advisedly, maybe to give you a proper impression about the international activities when it comes to enforcement. Finally, on stakeholders is collaborators. 2 parts of the collaboration. You have the technical capabilities and tools, okay, which will require cybersecurity companies, technology platforms, providers, and global corporations, essentially developing countermeasures, making their products secured by design, and providing information to state agencies. So you have Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Cisco, Rapid7, it goes on and on and on, doing awesome job here in the United States, being part of the CISA, which is like the CSA of the United States now, and providing information to them, trying to kind of like collaborate between the government and private sector in building some of the tools, and also trying to crack down on some of, because these attackers or these criminals, they use some of these platforms built by these people, okay? And that is where the technical capability collaboration is so relevant. All right, then the last part of it, so that I can conclude with cross-border recovery, you have awareness and policy advocacy, important part of the collaboration. Look at international organizations like the ITU. The ITU Global Cybersecurity Index actually gives us an indication year on year who is doing what and how well they are progressing when it comes to the lawmaking, when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to capacity building, when it comes to technical capabilities. All these things adds up to the fight when it comes to cybercrime. Look at the World Bank itself, the cybersecurity clinic they held within the West African region. Benin was a beneficiary of this, so at least it brings people up to speed on getting closer to protecting. The truth of the matter is, it's an international problem. If one country is not too prepared, it means it's a vulnerability to us all. Every single country is part of the attack surface when it comes to international cybercrime fighting. And then the UNODC also has a cybercrime repository where I took some of the cases. For lawyers on the court, it's a very good repository for you to build an understanding of some of these things. And then the World Economic Forum coming up with a cybercrime atlas, which would help map out cybercrime activities across the world, and then help with where law enforcement can get into play, where individuals can act, where corporations can act, where you can collaborate for investigations and things like that. Non-profit organizations are also doing some work. Global corporations like the Big Four accounting firms are doing advocacy work. They are issuing publications every now and then on cybersecurity and data privacy. And of course, Fortune 500 companies are also doing their bit, including law firms, banks, and some of these tech giants as well. In conclusion, we can look at the cross-border recovery in 2 parts. How do you recover? You invoke the state machinery, because within international law, it's quite difficult to just jump into another state trying to enforce laws or trying to enforce remedies. It's not that easy. And that is why when it comes to these cross-border recoveries, you look at invoking state machinery. If you think that from your forensics, the data is being hosted on a Google Cloud, you would have to engage Google through the appropriate procedures. And they are hoping they have strong international offices, strong legal basis to have conversations and identify where crime has been committed, and also to assist. For countries who have what we call the legal mutual assistance, it's a very good tool, because then it makes it easier for you to engage. I know Ghana do have one. The US do have one. The UK do have one. In fact, the UK even went further to also pass an act, which is the Public Access Information Act. I hope I got the name actually right, but something to that effect. Essentially, what it's meant to do is if they need access to data that's part of the commission of a crime, under that law, they would activate their legal mutual assistance with those states that are part of these acts and be able to access the required information. So it is not that easy, especially, for instance, if you look at ransomware, or if you look at a well-motivated cybercrime body, which is well resourced and have probably hosting moons and follow up on them. There are also the OFAC, Foreign Asset Control, and then there is SWIFT. If you follow the Bangladesh haste, one of the biggest cybercrime haste on a central bank, you will notice that it was through the SWIFT system that the tracking was done. It was still through the SWIFT banking system that some of the payments were halted. Again, in the RIB case, the Rwanda versus Maruki case, a way by which some of the monies were also tracked and stopped was through the SWIFT system. So that's why you need some of these, international financial systems monitoring, so you can leverage on it. And of course, ultimately, it has to do with how much and how well the states are vested in their own affairs and how well they are connected to themselves from the point of diplomacy. On the issue of the financial system, one challenge we have identified and still talking about and still looking at the possibilities around it, especially within blockchain law, is the cryptocurrency, which of course gives a lot of anonymity. But I'm also here to tell you that advanced studies have shown that the anonymity does not mean that transactions on a blockchain cannot be traced. They can be traced. And it is also the case why a place like the US, you can't do your cryptocurrency businesses away from certain exchanges that have been legitimized by the state, which will require you to do KYC. Of course, they're trying to balance the technology innovation as against trying to also ensure that we can fight cybercrime. So yes, this is a summary of what would have been probably maybe an hour or two lecture, but I hope I did communicate the essence of my assignment. And thank you so much for connecting. Jesse, back to you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I feel like I've learned quite a lot in a short period of time. That was very, very rich and compendious, and I'm sure we will be unpacking that for a long time. I could completely agree with you that this is fit for 1 hour, 2 hour lecture. Thank you very much. That was great. So from the international stage, we now zoom down to Ghana, to the local stage. And that will be done with the aid of the head of the cybercrime department of the Ghana Police Service, our dutiful protectors. And for this guest, I will let him introduce himself, none other than the person of Mr. Emmanuel JB. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother. Yes, I am Superintendent of Police, Mr. Emmanuel Jebi, currently the head of the cybercrime unit at the CID headquarters. I've been with the unit since its inception in September 2015 as the Fair Deputy to Dr. Gustav Herbert Janssen. I have served under him for quite the inception till this year, during this year when he handed the baton over to me to continue with the good work. I will start by thanking the first speaker when he dealt with the robust legislative framework currently in place to deal with cybercrime offenses and its prosecution. As you said and pointed out, the current laws, the Electronic Transactions Act of Act 770 of 2008, which set out the cyber crimes and the various provisions, and then the current Cyber Security Act of 2020 at 1038, Electronic Communications Act of 2008 at 775, Data Protection Act of 2012 at 843, Criminal Offences Act, Criminal and Other Offences Act of 1960, both at 29 and at 30. The institutions currently using these legal frameworks to enforce investigation and prosecution of cyber crimes include Economic and Organized Crime Office, EOCO, Ghana Police Service, represented and led by the Cyber Crime Unit, the Bureau of National cases. When it comes to the prosecution of cybercrime cases, we'll go into the challenges as we face now, but let me tell you a few of the institutions that actually do cybercrime prosecutions in the law courts. The Attorney General's Prosecution Division of the Ministry of Justice is one of the agencies that is fighting by way of prosecuting cases at the High Courts and sometimes at the lower courts, both the District Court and the Circuit Courts. EOCO, also with the fiat of the Attorney General, the Judicial Authority, the cybercrime cases are also being prosecuted by the Police Prosecution Department, but at the lower courts, particularly the District Courts and then the Circuit Courts. And the Chief Justice has set up a financial division of the High Court where cybercrime cases are being prosecuted or tried early on. Have all touched on some of the offenses: charlatanic advertisement, conspiracy, abetment, obtaining electronic payment medium falsely, sextortion, general offenses, general provision relating to cyber offenses, and all these offenses, adequate provisions have been made in these laws we have stated early on to be prosecuted successfully in our law courts. Also, unlawful access to stored communications, cyber offenses in Ghana. In fact, our legal framework has adequately dealt with every aspect of prohibition when it comes to cyber space. Unauthorized access to computer program or electronic records and what have you. Indecent sharing images of children, which used to be child pornography. That particular provision has been repealed from the Electronic Transactions Act. The challenges we are facing in the prosecution of cybercrime cases are many, and I will take my time to take you through some of the challenges, at least the pressing ones. Prosecution of cybercrime cases will only be successful when you have gathered adequate and hardcore evidence, which is electronic and digital in nature, but interestingly and in reality scattered across multiple jurisdictions on the globe. So the challenge in accessing electronic evidence is one of the basic challenge that we are facing when it comes to gathering, investigating, and prosecution of cybercrime offenses. You know, Section 103 of the Electronic Transactions Act even mandates the service providers to keep logs and records of names, electronic source and destination address, billing records of any, duration of service to a subscriber or a customer, types of services and related logs of the subscribers, activities which take place on its electronic platform as may be reasonably appropriate for a period of 12 months. In spite of these provisions of the law, it is not enforced because even many law enforcement officers, investigators, and even some prosecutors are not aware of this provision and the powers they have to demand compliance from the service providers. So a typical investigator will prepare a very nice affidavit and then the motion as party application to request certain data from these electronic service providers. But when they don't respond, or when they don't even comply with the orders of the court to make such data available to the law enforcement, we don't even know that the law mandated to take the service providers on and to compel them to give us such information to facilitate and make the prosecution of such cases successful. Currently in Ghana, we are facing several cases of revenge porns and the nature of and the use of internet to malign healthy business. And then that's the nature of the investigation required to gather even evidence here in Ghana is a big problem for us to get a successful and fruitful prosecution of such cases. An example is this current incidents of extortion and people threat access using the internet to malign their other competitors or healthy businesses in the system. This increase in extortion cases, online scams currently happen when it peaked somewhere during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we went during and then immediately after the lockdown. We have a lot of cases involving such, but because we are facing a serious challenge in gathering evidence, getting the required evidence from the service providers to aid successful prosecution, you always end up in court with information that may not be necessarily to incriminate these threat access or even to get them arrested at the first instance before they are put before court for prosecution. Again, the cybercrime unit and then other law enforcement units often are not able to get to the source of the information within even the country, let alone where the evidence is happening outside the country. That is when the service providers are not within the local country where the offense is reported for investigations and prosecutions. And particularly when cybercrime offenses and then its evidence are spread across the various and multiple jurisdictions across the globe. The other challenge is the improper handling of these digital and electronic evidence. Some of our investigators, in fact, have not been trained to the level where they can properly follow the protocols, the best practices in handling digital and electronic evidences, such that when they are presented in court, during prosecution, it will be very, very smooth and then fair for a very successful prosecution of such cases. Here, even at the CID headquarters, Ghana Police Service, the laboratory that is established, funded by the UNICEF, we don't even have enough trained digital forensic examiners to actually
Hello, Jesse.
Yeah, it seems we've lost the connection to Superintendent. Let me see if I can contact him. So I just reached him. He is having connection problems, so he is trying to reconnect as we speak. We'll give him a couple of minutes. In the interim, if you have any questions for us, I know I have quite a number of questions to myself. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free, drop them in the chat. We will get to them at the end of the presentation. Yeah.
Yes, sorry for the interruption. The network was misbehaving. Yes. Yes, so I think I was on the challenges we face by our investigators in gathering evidence, both at the investigative level and then during when the exhibits are sent to our forensic laboratories. Some law enforcement agencies do not even have digital forensic laboratory. And you know, these, when you are gathering evidence for presentation in court, if it is not done within a forensically sound environment, its admissibility becomes a challenge. So that is why it is important that even if you don't have a well-established digital forensic laboratory, you should be trained to use processes and procedures, protocols that is well standard and it is of best practices internationally so that its admissibility will not become a challenge. Another challenge in the prosecution of cybercrime cases is the unwillingness of witnesses to testify for fear of being stigmatized or losing clientele. Recently, these type of cases, sextortion, and then the attacks on these banking systems, the banks are afraid that should it come to the public domain, that they are so vulnerable to the extent that they have been victimized or they have been attacked or they have been victims. Then they fear that the trust that their clients will lose. So they will rather go for maybe out of court settlement, or they will not even pursue the case at all. And then they write it off as one of their provision for bad debt. And then extortion cases as well. Sometimes you have some influential people being victimized in this way, and the fear that people will start to raise, will be pointing fingers at them. Was it this big man or was it this influential person who has been victimized, who has, been gone through exposing their nudity and stuff like that? So they would rather wish that the investigation will end when the evidence is able to be maybe extracted and they may be wiped out of the suspect devices so that nobody else will see or get to hear that they were a victim of sextortion. Our young men and women are facing various forms of cyberbullying or revenge attacks, but they are unwilling to testify in court because of this victimization that may happen later on. Religious leaders, teachers, lawyers, even law enforcement, some law enforcement officers are being victimized through sextortion. But when investigation is complete and you are to go to court, you find some of them coming to talk to you that, oh, officer, you have done very well. The suspect has agreed that he will destroy all the evidence he has on his system, or he has agreed to refund any money that I have sent to him. Another challenge for investigators and prosecutors is the long delay associated with gathering of evidence. As I said earlier on, the evidence is scattered across the globe. You can have one particular cyber attack or incident reported here in Ghana, but you may have the evidence, maybe one in Nigeria, others also in US, UK, China, Hong Kong. How do you gather all these evidence across the globe and put them together? And even the procedure, the legal way where such evidence will be admissible in court is also another matter. We all know of this mutual legal assistance treaty or letter of regulatory. It takes a lot of time. And it also even depends upon the kind of treaty or agreement between the specific countries involved. And then the dual criminality aspect of it. One particular incident may be criminalized here in Ghana, but if the evidence is in a country or a jurisdiction where that particular conduct is not criminalized, then it means that particular country is not ready to produce or give you the evidence for you to prosecute successfully. And then the time it takes, even though through various arrangements like police to police or law enforcement to law enforcement cooperation and an arrangement, but to get it to use in court to be admissible, it has to go through a specific acceptable way of getting that evidence, which we know to be the mutual legal assistance treaty. And it takes time. And once the case takes time in court, it gets to a point where the witnesses may even lose interest to come and testify for the threat actor to be prosecuted successfully and punished. Another challenge is the jurisprudence, which is fairly new area in the criminal jurisprudence. So we lack enough precedents to resort to in prosecuting these cases. And not many judges have also been trained to handle cybercrime cases. And this poses a challenge. Same as the investigators. As we speak, there is only one cybercrime unit here in Ghana at the CID headquarters. So almost every cybercrime case that is reported, even if it is investigated outside CID headquarters, and then include a digital device that has been retrieved, then it has to be forwarded to cybercrime unit, the forensic laboratory, for it to be examined. And you can imagine the number of devices that will be sent across the country for examination of such devices for prosecution. So the challenges are many, but we have to do what we have. So we are doing our best to make sure that within the record times and using the limited resources that we have, including both the trained investigators and then the digital forensic analysts, we always doing our best to make sure that we get evidence in a procedure that is acceptable, that will not affect its or their admissibility when we finally end in court for prosecution. So the way forward to make sure that we overcome these challenges for a successful prosecution of cybercrime cases, one will be the enhancement of cooperation among partners. And by this, I mean both the international partners and then the local partners. Locally, most of the evidence when it comes to cybercrime are not with the state government or the government institutions. They are mostly with the private institutions like the telecommunication sector, for example. Almost every telecommunication company here in Ghana is fully owned by the private sector. So when the evidence is with them, and you have to get this evidence and then use it in the prosecution, you have to go through the basic procedure established by law, that you have to go to court, pay application, and make sure that you get that evidence. Even if you want to examine a seized phone as an exhibit, you need a court order for you to access. So we have to enhance the cooperation between these local partners first, and then our international community as well. These telecommunicating giants and then communication companies and then the media companies, most of them are outside the jurisdiction of this country. So if you don't enhance the cooperation and arrangement to make sure that whilst you are investigating, you share intelligence to fast track and then to advance the course of your investigation, and then you may follow it up with other appropriate, accepted legally processes to get the evidence to back your investigation and then for prosecution. Then the cases may not even get to court at all. So international cooperation and then the local cooperation is very key. Another challenge is to the sensitization of the public, the general public, to cooperate, that whether you are a victim or you are not, or you have evidence that a cybercrime has been an issue. I don't think keeping it away from your clients, your clientele, will mean that when they get to it, when they get to know of it, it will even be more damaging, because then they will know that they cannot trust you when you are victimized, and then telling them, and then they said that you are taking for the law to take its own course, and then also to support prosecution by being in court, testify to make sure that the threat actor or the suspects are dealt with according to law, to serve as a deterrent. Then that will not help. So one, let's educate our general public to continue to protect themselves first, and then the companies, the institutions. No technology or no solution is 100% accurate to protect you fully, because of the human factor and then the technology itself. So there is a way that you can keep all your defense systems up to date, to make sure that even to reduce the risk, okay, and then to reduce your vulnerabilities from being attacked. That way we all be safe, and then we protect our people, and then also to make sure that the fight against cybercrime will not end only at reporting, but to support the police and then the Attorney General's prosecution department division, that these threat actors are prosecuted and punished according to law. And then also working together, weakening the front of organized crime, because it all starts from there. Cybercrime is now one of the fastest growing transnational organized crime happening. Cybercrime happening here is cybercrime happening everywhere. So let's continue to work together and make sure that we get all our loins gathered, and to make sure that our law enforcement and then our courts are well resourced, our judges trained, prosecutors equally trained, so that they will understand these emerging areas in the cyberspace, and then successfully we'll be able to bring, even if you are not able to, do away with every cybercrime happening, at least we should be able to reduce it to the barest minimum for us to be free. And then we ourselves individually, we should also continue to practice good hygiene on the cyberspace anytime we have the opportunity to be online. And then also to protect our children online, because child protection issue is also very dear, because our children, they are born into this age of technology. So they are always doing everything almost, it's part of their life now, be it in schools, in education, at home, everything. So if we continue to guide them in mentoring them, those of us who have the opportunities, the practitioners, our children and then our future will be safely guarded for a very strong future and healthy future for us all. I will end here by thanking you, my early speakers, for their contribution. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Superintendent, for that speech. That was very, very enlightening. I think I will be in agreement with everyone here when I say that was very, very enriching. So we've looked at the local scope of cybercrime, we've looked at the international scope of cybercrime, and one thing that sticks out to me so far is that as with all things in real life, it's complicated, right? It's very, very complicated. And depending on the case you have, it can range from resolvable to something which is a whole spaghetti bowl of problems, right? So the one thing I think we can all agree on is that we would rather not end up here, right? Okay, and so prevention is the best cure, as they say. And that leads me to a final guest to tell us how the average person can guard themselves so they don't end up here in the first place, because there's a big chance you might go through hell before you get a resolution. All right, so our final guest is from Cybertech, Mr. Ben Tego. Let me tell you a bit about his illustrious career. Mr. Tego is a senior executive with 20 years plus experience and has extensive international experience. He's currently CEO of Cybertech. He's actively working in the cybersecurity space by developing a new and innovative concept to secure businesses / assets from cybersecurity threats. Cybertech is an award-winning cybersecurity consulting company that helps organizations to secure their businesses through innovation. He has previously served as Senior Vice President of Network Operations for Airtel Africa. Prior to that, he was Vice President and CTIO in Africa for Millicom International Cellular. Mr. Tego holds a degree in electrical / electronic engineering, first class honors from KNUST, an MBA finance degree from University of Leicester, a diploma in finance from the London Business School, and a diploma in leadership program from Stanford University Graduate School. So we are in very distinguished company here. Let me not waste time. Mr. Ben Tego, kindly take us away.
So thank you very much. Can you hear me? Just respond if you can, so that I'm sure.
Yes, please. You are loud and clear, sir.
And the presentation, you can see my slides?
Yes, please.
Okay, excellent. So look, thank you very much for the speakers that spoke initially. I think they hit the nail right on the head. You know, I always ask myself, what would we do if there is nothing like cybercrime in this world? You know, but unfortunately, that is an ideal scenario. But I believe that, you know, a lot of the challenges that we face are as a result of lack of ignorance. You know, sometimes, or I would say ignorance on the part of people, or the fact that people are not security aware. And so, you know, the attackers somehow take us for a ride. Unfortunately, like the previous speakers have said, these attackers are organized. They are very organized. You know, they have a lot of money. You know, we talked about, you know, the cybersecurity industry being probably the third largest economy, you know, after the US and China. So these are not, you know, individuals that are just playing games around. This is like an organized group of people. They have R&D, they research, they understand, and unfortunately, sometimes, but most of the time, they are somehow ahead of the curve. So my talk today is very simple. You know, I want to state a few facts. I want to talk about how the attackers operate. I want to speak and I want to come down to earth. Give me a minute, sorry, I think I have a bit of a challenge. Okay. Okay, and I think that I would want to talk about how the attackers operate. a few types of attack, and I want to talk about some practical things that we can do to secure ourselves. Because if you look at all that we are talking about, it's about bad people trying to do bad things to us. So what do we as individuals or as organizations do to ensure that we secure ourselves from these bad guys? So I'll start with a few facts. I think we've talked about it. The cybersecurity industry is worth 6 trillion. It's even more than this. This is the statistics from 2019. And like we said, because it's 6 trillion, it's an organized industry. But unfortunately, a lot of us, individuals and companies, still do not, learn, about this security industry. As we speak, 75% of all legitimate websites have unpatched vulnerabilities. This means that 1 out of 4, can you see my screen?
No, it's not.
Sorry, is my screen changing? I think I have some technical challenges here.
We can see your screen, please.
Which one can you see? Cybersecurity facts?
No, please. The first slide.
Okay, so you know what? I need to fix my. Just a minute. Sorry. Give me a minute. Sorry, I need to.
All right.
Sort of. Sorry.
We can see it now, please.
Going? Okay, good, excellent. Okay, so what I'm saying is that 75% of all legitimate websites are unpatched or have unpatched vulnerabilities, which means that 1 of 3 out of 4 websites that you find in the world, okay, have vulnerabilities. And these are not vulnerabilities that are not known, but they are known, but we have just, or the people responsible have not patched this. I mean, this for me is a very, very serious problem. If you look at daily ransomware attacks, we have about 4,000 daily ransomware attacks, in the world. So this is, I'm talking about the global picture. Now, when we come to Ghana, we don't have a lot of statistics, but when you look at the Ghana, from the Bank of Ghana, they have some statistics. You can see that cyber fraud or cyber and email fraud in terms of value has more than doubled. Between 2020 and 2021, it has multiplied by 2.6 times. Okay, the biggest challenge that the banking sector has is ATM and POS fraud. But then when you go to e-money fraud, it has almost tripled between 2020 and 2021. I mean, the message that I want to put here is that we have a serious challenge. Globally, we have a challenge, and then locally, or even in Ghana, we also have a challenge because the numbers are very, very clear and tells us so. Now we can talk a bit more about the banking sector, because, there is a lot of data on the banking sector. 84% of the total number of fraud incidents that were reported by institutions in 2021 came from the electronic money issuers. And when I talk about electronic money issuers, I'm talking about the mobile platforms. And now we have G-Money, which is from the Ghana Commercial Bank. Now, if you look at the successful cyber and email fraud, it increased by almost 150% between 2020 and 2021. Momo and other e-money frauds increased by almost 210%, between the same period. And overall, the number of successful or the percentage of successful fraud incidents increased by over 140%. I mean, the reason why I'm presenting this is to paint the picture for us to understand that we have a problem, okay? However, I believe that the solution to this problem are very simple steps that we need to take. One of the biggest challenges that we have is the fact that a lot of people, individuals, and companies are just unaware about the threats that security or cybersecurity poses. A lot of companies, wants to create efficiencies, we want to have apps. We want to give our consumers or digital experiences. However, these digital experiences, they come with a lot of efficiencies and customer experience improvements. But on the other side, they come with a lot of risks. And from where I see it, I notice or I realize that we tend not to look at these risks. I can give you an example of a company that we work for. In fact, it's a bank, okay? I cannot mention names here, but this bank has an app, and through the app, when we were doing some work for them, through the app, we were able to get to the core banking system, and this means that if you are a hacker and you're able to get to the core banking system through an app, you can do whatever you want. You can credit, debit, move money around and things like that. So in as much as an organization or as people, we want to improve our lives, we also have to ensure that we are taking care of the risks that come across. So what I want to do here is to break down, simplify this myth and show in a very simple way what we can do as individuals and also as organizations. So first of all, I want to talk about how the attackers operate. We all know that these are organized groups. These are not individuals operating in vacuums. They have a program. They work exactly like how we work as professionals in the organization, in the security industry. So first of all, what they do is they start by preparation. So by preparation, they prepare their platforms, their devices, and very importantly, they anonymize themselves, so that you will not easily be able to trace back to them. They have test environment, they simulate their attacks to make sure that, when they are attacking, you will not be able to, get close or you will not be able to track their steps easily to come back to them. Then they do what we call information gathering. With information gathering, what they do is simple: to gather information about all possible ways of their victims. And by their victims, it can be individuals, it can be companies, it can be small organizations, it can be nation states, it can be anything. So they gather enough information. So they really do a decent job. And actually, we as cybersecurity experts, when we are working with our clients, we go through very similar process. Then they do what we call vulnerability gathering. With vulnerability gathering, what they use is that they use the gathered information to find loopholes, basically, within the systems. They look for untreated vulnerabilities. There are so many vulnerabilities in systems. I mean, most of you use smartphones. And when you use a smartphone, every now and then you receive, a message that you need to upgrade your software. Most of the time, in as much as you are improving the efficiency of your software, you are also patching vulnerabilities that have been found within the system, okay? But what happens is that a lot of the times, a lot of companies don't have programs, to patch these exploitable vulnerabilities. Then the next stage that these hackers do, or the next stage that they go into, is to do exploitation. So here, they exploit the easiest vulnerabilities. This is where they start from, okay? And once they gain access, they begin to do what we call privilege escalation, to escalate basically their privileges within the system. And they do this in a stealth mode, in such a way that you will not be able to, or you will not be easily able to identify them. And then once they are able to exploit, they start their malicious activities. They can put in, malware. I mean, these days, I believe everybody knows about malware. They can put in a malware, and more importantly, they try to maintain their access in the organization. We worked on a forensic case where in a country in Africa, where the attacker was in their network for 8 months, okay? And he was just there maintaining access. He didn't do any damage, he didn't do any criminal activity. What he was doing was just to understand how things happen within the organization. Who authorizes, who raises, I don't know, a purchase order, who authorizes, who approves. And the day that they strike, they decided to strike, they were able to withdraw more than 200,000 euro, across ATMs in that particular, within that particular organization. So they were there for 8 months. So the question is, how can a malicious actor be in your organization for 8 months and nobody was able to know that this was happening? They maintain access and they clear their tracks. So whatever they are doing, they make sure that they delete logs and stuff like that to remain anonymous within the organization. And now I want to talk about a few types of attacks, and again, my presentation, I try to be as down to earth as possible. I just want everybody, I'm sure there may be non-technical people in this presentation. So I want to be as simple as possible, to explain or to communicate my messages across. We have different types of attacks. These days, I believe that the most common that everybody knows about is malware. That is the most common. I will talk about it, and I'll talk about even the most common malwares that we have in the system. So we have various types of attack, and you can see the percentages. So 24% of all attacks are mainly around web application. So with this type of attacks, with this vector of attack, what happens is that the actor or the threat actor tries to expose company database or try to perform payment transaction fraud, or maybe even leak customer information. And then you have what we call the denial of service, DOS attack, where what the customer do or the threat actor does is that he flags, your network to slow it down or make it virtually impossible. Imagine yourself, or for those who are non-technical, getting into your office and then you have a crowd or a mob in front of your door. You will not be able to get into your office. So in simple terms, this is what we call denial of service. And then we have what we call reconnaissance. Here you are gathering information and you are preparing for future attack. And the forensic case that we worked on that I just spoke about, like I said, the guys were in the network doing what we call reconnaissance for 8 months. So they were just understanding. It's like a fact-finding mission, And then we have what we call mobile application, attacks. Here we want to capture data packets, we want to do what we call man-in-the-middle attack and stuff like that. And then the almighty malware attack, this is what, we talk about. Sometimes when we talk about malware, people get confused and stuff like that. But let's understand that a malware is just a malicious piece of code that you tell to do whatever you want to do. That is a very simple definition of a malware. So we have different types of malware I will talk about, in my next slides. So we educate ourselves on what malware is, because I think there's sometimes a lot of confusion about what it is. So you can have a malware or a malicious, or we can call it a malicious software to steal data, and the data can be personal, it can be data from the system, it can be confidential data, it can be financial, it can be credential, it can be a credit card data, it can be anything, Another type of malware is a ransomware. We will talk about that later. And here you basically encrypt the data of the individual or the company, and then you demand some kind of payment, and once the payment is made, you send the decrypt tool for them to get back their data. And then we have other types of attacks. We have social engineering, we have insider threats. That is a very serious one. I want to talk about it. Cybersecurity is so broad, so I just picked the points or the topics that I felt were relevant, for this conversation. Insider threats is very, very important. Whenever we think about cybersecurity or threat actors, I know when we're talking, or all the conversations we're having, we are talking about threat actors, a crime committed in Ghana, but then the data is in Dubai, and another piece of the data is on a server in Iran. That is all true. But the reality is that majority of incidents or crimes happens from within, from internal. Majority of incidents happen with internal collaboration. I think more than 80% from the statistics. I think this is very important to take note. So when we start thinking about cybersecurity, we don't start thinking about some bad guy sitting in North Korea or Iran or somewhere. I mean, that is a reality. However, the statistics is that it is more likely that your employee will commit the crime than somebody outside. You know, the ratio is 4 to 1. I mean, 80% is probably, I think, 3 or 4 to 1. Yeah. So I want to educate us, you know, a bit about malware. You know, again, like I said, a malware is a piece of code that you tell to do anything you want. So I can install a malware or a malicious, a malware on let's say machines, people's machines, unknown to them. You know, I can compromise these machines and it's unknown to them, and I can use these machines as zombies, you know, to install or to initiate attacks, basically. So these we call zombies, basically. Then we have what we call worms. You know, these are malwares that replicate themselves, you know, to spread across networks. We have rootkits. You know, these are designed to give unauthorized access to systems. And then we have keyloggers. These are, you know, very dangerous. You know, if I have a keylogger on your machine, what it means that every stroke that you make on your machine, somehow I am recording it. So I can be able to steal your passwords. I can do many things. Basically, I have control of your machine. Then we have what we call Trojan horses. You know, we all know the story of Troy. You know, basically, they put the horse there. The soldiers were in the horse. They misled them. They took the horse into the city, and then they were able to attack. So when you hear of Trojan horses, what we are saying is that these are malicious codes or malicious piece of software that misleads users of its true intent. And then we have spyware. You know, these are, as the name implies, you know, they basically to spy on another computer and get covert information. And finally, ransomware, you know, which I think most of you have heard in recent days or in recent years or in recent months. You know, these are malicious code that are designed to block, basically to block or to encrypt data. And once the data is encrypted, you pay a ransom to get it restored. Now, the cost of malware, I mean, as in general, for companies per year, I'm talking about per company, the statistic says that it's about 2.6 million USD, you know. So this is not a small problem to companies. It's a very, very big problem. Now we talk about ransomware. I want to focus a bit on ransomware. Very dangerous. Can you see my screen? Very dangerous. It spreads all over the network. It can be to an individual. We are just doing a simulation for a company at the moment in a country, and what we are trying to do is to see how people will react. So we send malicious code to them. They click on it, and then we just seize control of their machines. You know, individuals, you know, sometimes to servers and stuff like that. And it's amazing how people react, you know, when suddenly you seize or take control of their machines, and then you put, you know, some kind of a message, you know, on their machine. You know, sometimes it even has some emotional problem, you know, some emotional effect on them. So again, I'm trying to do a little bit of education here. Ransomware, you know, basically we encrypt the data, and then it is impossible to retrieve unless you pay some ransom and get it reinstalled. The other thing is that if you are a company or you are an organization that do follow proper information security management processes, you will have a backup. So you will be able to restore, you know, your backup. Now, when you look at daily ransomware attacks globally, it's more than 4,000 daily ransomware attacks. So this is happening as we speak, so this is a reality. I want to speak a bit about social engineering because that is one of the very, very simple ways to get attacked, and reason why I'm talking about these simple things is that, we can talk about the laws, they are important, it means to address the situation, but we must, in the first place, not find ourselves in situations where we have to resort to the law. I mean, the law is there, but it's very important that we protect ourselves. And to protect ourselves, I believe that the first medium or the first thing we need to do is to understand what is happening within the ecosystem. I mean, when you look at companies and organizations, companies invest millions and millions into protecting their networks. They build firewalls, or they have firewalls. And for those who are not technical, see firewall as like a security fence, in your house. When you have a security fence, you can put an electric fence on top of the security fence, and you can put cameras on top of that. You can have multi-layered security. However, the statistics is very clear that the weakest link in cybersecurity are the people. It doesn't matter how tall the wall is or the fence is. It doesn't matter how complex your algorithms in your firewalls are to protect you. If the people within the organization do not appreciate what cybersecurity is, you can easily be hacked. And you can easily be hacked through social engineering. Let's look at what happened to Uber a couple of weeks ago. It was very simple. It was not complicated. It was just through very very simple social engineering through one employee, and the guy was able to get into the organization and quickly escalate his privileges to take control of the domain controller. So, I mean, we want to understand social engineering very well, It can be done through emails, can be done through messages, through calls, it can be done through face-to-face. The key is to convince the victim to trigger a malicious activity. And what is key in social engineering is that you want to create curiosity in your victim, you want to create urgency in your victim, or you want to capitalize on the ignorance of the victim. And I can give you many examples of social engineering. You can pretend to be an IT employee, and ask for the password of somebody. And once you give your password out, that is it. We just did a security assessment for a bank, a very large bank. And what we did was, in social engineering, was to dress like the plumber, okay? We said we had a tag, we had the ID, we come from the company, we are coming to fix a problem because we knew that there was a problem with the piping. And once you are dressed in that overall, you couldn't believe what happened. We were able to pass through all the security and get inside the bank. Once you get inside the bank, you can do anything you want if you're an expert, okay, depending on where you get to. Okay, another very simple social engineering is you get to the receptionist, you want to talk to the CEO, the CEO is not available. You say, oh, by the way, I have a device, can you take this and give to your CEO? I have something I want to print out. The innocent receptionist just put the USB device in his or her machine, and then you quickly install a backdoor, and then you have access to the entire network. Or tailgating. You just follow somebody, unknowingly into and have access to some kind of environment. In Ghana, the banking sector email fraud in 2021 and email is one aspect of social engineering, was 1.5 million Ghana cedis, yeah, according to the statistics. So I'm just trying to talk about, the very common attacks. I don't want to get complicated with all the jargons. And one of the social engineering attacks is what we call phishing. You know, fishing is just like the name implies, like you go and fish, you know, from you know, those of you who like fishing on the river and stuff like that. You know, this is part of a social engineering attack, again, with the objective of revealing confidential information and stuff like that. And it's very important to explain this attack very well, because it's one of the most used attacks in security. You know, when we talk about all the attacks, you just need, you know, you just need one weak link in the chain and you are in. So we look at emails, for instance. It's a very simple way of, you know, creating, of getting into the networks of organizations. So again, I like to give practical examples. We were working with this company. We had to, you know, try and help them to understand how socially or how security aware the organization is. So we just went to buy a domain name. So let's say cybertech is with a Q, it ends with a Q. So we went to buy, you know, cybertech with maybe a double Q in the end. And then we create a nice email address with a CEO name. So as soon as you see the email, if you don't look at it critically, that it has probably a Q at the end or the E has an accent on the top, you know, you think that, okay, this is an email from my CEO, let me open quickly. And embedded in the email, you give a very nice message, you know, congratulations, you know, you have been selected as an employee of the quarter or employee of the month or whatever happens within the organization. Click this link, you know, to access, you know, your gift or something. And as soon as you click, we are in. And when I say we are in, it really means we are in the network, yeah? So we have been able to bypass your firewalls. We have been able to bypass everything because of this, you know, this simple email. Then today we have, you know, vision. You know, vision is using voice. And these days, this is becoming very prevalent. You know, we have people calling you. I'm currently working on a project with a company, a delivery company. You know, what has happened is that a malicious actor has created, has cloned the website of this company, and he has managed to, he has cloned the website of this company. So when you are receiving a parcel and sometimes you dial, you know, you log into the portal, it takes you to this malicious website, okay? And then it tells you, call this number, call that number, you know, and then we will help you to get the delivery done. You call the number, they tell you, okay, send this money, and then, you know, he disappears in the end. We have also smishing. You know, smishing, what happens is that you get an SMS. You know, these days, if I even receive SMSs, people giving you very juicy contracts. You know, we have a job for you. You know, it's you are going to be paid, I don't know, 1,000 Ghana cedis per week or or 2,000 Ghana cedis per week. Click this link and fill the form. As soon as you click the link, you can be sure that there's an executable file that has been, you know, downloaded in your file. So, I mean, the whole purpose of these attacks, and again, for me, I want to educate the public because I know there are many non-technical people here, is that never click on any of these. I mean, I always say that think before you click. You know, the human psychology is more click before you think, but you must always think before you make any clicking of an email. We can talk about removable media. Maybe I will jump a bit here and go to the insider threat. I really want to talk about this a bit. So, like I said, when I started, you know, when we think about insider threats or we think about threat actors, we always think about the bad guy sitting outside. But unfortunately, 80% of all the fraud happens internally. Okay, I can give you an example. I'm working for a fintech, you know, company, and what happened is that they have a third party, you know, that developed an application for them, and this third party, the guy who developed the application left, and for some reason his credentials was not removed from the system. 2 years down the line, he woke up and just checked the portal, and he realized that his credentials were working. And what did he do? Once his credentials were working, he started, he logged onto the system and started, committing fraud, basically. So it's very important that we think about the fact that we have internal insider threat actors. I mean, and when you have somebody inside, there's some, if he's inside, he can cause more harm than the one outside. Okay, and I mean, most data breaches are insider jobs. In fact, more than 60% of organizations experience this kind of attack yearly. And between 15 to 25% of insider breaches are from trusted partners. When I say trusted partners, sometimes third parties that you have connected to your system. So maybe you are company A, but company B, C, and D provide service for you. So these, sometimes you get compromised from these insider breaches. And again, I give the statistics from the banking fraud of the Bank of Ghana. 53% of all the banking fraud is 2021 had staff involvement. 53% had staff involvement. So when we talk about insider threats, I want to focus a bit on this because it's important. Sometimes it's intentional and sometimes non-intentional. And then intentional means that, intentional means that the guy was unauthorized, but then he managed to get into some information. It's going to be because of corruption, sabotage, collusion and stuff like that. And sometimes it can be unintentional. It can be negligence, it can be carelessness, it can be unintentional loss of, unintentional dereliction of duty. Sometimes we have situations where people send sensitive information to a wrong party. You type a wrong email and then you just send it. It can be a phishing email, which means that he receives an email and he just clicked or she clicks and then the system gets compromised. So what can we do? I think we've talked a lot about all this, but what can we do as individuals or as organizations to try to mitigate, all these attacks that we are talking about? Because let's put it in perspective. If we are able to mitigate these attacks, what is going to happen is that for sure, we are going to reduce the burden and the stress on our legal system and on our policing system. So we must have safe internet habits. These are simple things. Avoid visiting and downloading untrusted websites, for instance. I think this is simple, but sometimes people avoid using cracked software. I have been in organizations where the entire organizations are using a cracked Windows application. I mean, once you are using that application, you have just opened up for attacks. We must be suspicious of emails. When we receive emails, let's not be quick to click the links. And never click an executable file. When you see a file with the extension .exe, you should never click it. And you should download software only from official websites. There are a lot of software applications on the web. A lot of them have malicious code in them. So we must ensure that we keep to these safe habits. I want to talk a little bit about working at the office. Working at the office these days, we do a lot of remote working. I want to jump to that because I think I'm out of time. Remote working, a lot of us, we sit at the cafe and then we just work. Never connect to a free Wi-Fi that is just in the cafe. I mean, if you are connected to it, make sure you have a VPN. You must secure your connection. What the VPN does is that between your device and the internet, your data is encrypted. So today we have remote working. It's now, it's come to stay with us. If you are working remotely, you have to ensure that you are connected securely, through VPN. This is very, very important. Now I want to talk a bit about company security. We must make sure that we have information security policies and procedures. You know, as organizations, you must have policies and procedures. One very common security standard is the ISO 27001. If you're a company, you must try to comply to this. If you comply to this, you know, it means that you have the basic security requirements, both physical and logical, upon which your organization will operate. Now, I want to talk about passwords. You know, I know that one of the requirements in information security is passwords. And I know that a lot of us, you know, we fall foul to this. 90%, 95% of passwords we see, we are able to crack. Yeah. So rather than using passwords, I mean, just normal passwords, please use passphrases. You can see on the right side, you know, Harry Potter, summer 2002. Most of us, our passwords are our children's name, our date of birth. Note that any word that can be found in the dictionary, you can crack it in less than 10, 20, in less than a minute, it can be cracked. Yeah, the applications that we use for cracking software. So you can use, you know, when you look at the bottom, I've said that I am ambitious, then I will do it, you know. But the way, for instance, I've written it, use sentences. It's very easy to remember sentences, but then try to use characters and stuff like that to make it complex for yourself. So now, having said this, I want to talk about a bit about cyber tech. We focus on cyber security. I just want to talk about what we do. We do information security. We can help you in the governance, risk, and compliance. We do offensive security, so we can help you with your vulnerability management. We do defensive security, so we can help you to manage defend your organization. And then we do digital forensics. You know, this is an area where when you are hacked, we can come in and help you to understand what happened, and also to present, like, you know, the previous speaker said, to present your case in a way that it's admissible in court. And finally, we do, very importantly, awareness training. So I want to talk about, you know, we have won some awards. In fact, we have won the JITA Award in 2021, and this year we just won it a couple of weeks ago. I think 2 weeks ago we won it. So we won it 2 times in a row, and these are some of our customers. So, well, I would want to end here. I think I've gone beyond my time, but I want to end here. I hope that I've been helpful. I try to be as simple as possible to those who are non-technical, to understand, you know, the basics of cybersecurity and how to protect yourself or your organization from these threats. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Tego, for your presentation. That was very, very enlightening. We will take a couple of questions, preferably 1 or 2 questions, and then we will wrap up the program. We have a question in the webinar chat from Emmanuel Plange. It is a 2-part question, and so whichever of the guests wants to handle that, please feel free. He says, have there been any instances of cybersecurity cases / incidences in other sectors of Ghana apart from the banking industry? For example, in the energy and telecommunications sectors. I realized that most cases recorded and reported on come from the banking sector. And follow-up one, is it a case of these other sectors not being able to detect and identify cybersecurity attacks, or a general lack of reporting posture? 2, he says, what is expected to be the line of action from sectoral regulators / authorities? If any of our guests wants to tackle that, feel free. He is asking that the level of cybercrime he sees is mostly in the banking sector. And so is it as prevalent in the other sectors? And what is expected to be the line of action from those other sectors? What is the line of action from their regulators and the authorities?
So I will answer the first two. I mean, I'll leave the regulation part, but I believe that sorry, let me start my video. I believe that the cybersecurity problem is across sectors. You know, it's not only prevalent in the banking sector. I think that the reason why we see that it's prevalent in the banking sector is because we have the data available. And we have the data available because the banking sector got themselves organized. In fact, they are the first institution in Ghana that got themselves well organized. If you look at the BOG Act, the BOG, the Cybersecurity Directive, you know, it came in, I think, sometime 2017-18. Okay, so they began to focus on this, and it's because, you know, when it comes to money, you know, it's quite sensitive. So they took the step ahead, and they are ahead of all the other sectorial, I would say, sets or SOCs. So it's simply the simple fact is that because they started earlier, we have more data on them. But from my experience, where I sit, you know, we are doing digital forensics for all kinds of organizations, for telecom organizations, for fintechs, for banks, so the crime is everywhere, I can say, for an authority. But we are reporting the only place that we have, or the only sector that we have real tangible facts is the banking sector. I believe that with the establishment of the CSA, over time, we will have, you know, appropriate data for all the other sectors.
Thank you for that answer. The final comment that we will be taking is from Evans Thompson. He says, can penetration testing, in quote, be adopted as a measure for domestic prevention of cyber attacks so that an IT expert can test the strength of the IT infrastructure in a home or a small office by that? Or is it reserved for large networks and servers? Is there any alternative for local IT infrastructure?
Look, I mean, in principle, you know, penetration testing can be done in any network as long as it's a network, because it's the same tools that you use, whether it's a 10 computer network or 1,000 computer network. I mean, you're able to do it. I think the question is the cost, you know, for a local environment.
For those who might not be caught up with the lingo, can you explain what penetration testing?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. So basically, penetration test is I will say that it's in layman terms trying to attack a network, you know, a network, you know, IT infrastructure, and whilst attacking, you want to find the loopholes or the vulnerabilities in those networks, and then you capitalize on these, and what the bad actors do is that they capitalize on these vulnerabilities to do exploits, basically, and to deploy malicious code and stuff like that. So this is what we talk about when we talk about penetration testing. So basically, I attack, I find loopholes, and I take advantage of the loopholes, okay? So that's penetration testing in simplicity. Now, to do this, you need tools. You know, you need processes and you need expertise. So the simple answer to the question is that you can do penetration testing on both home network, very small network, or on large networks. However, the challenge with small networks is that they are pretty expensive, you know, when you want to do these penetration testing. However, now there are free tools, you know, there are open source tools. So you can use these open source tools if you have somebody who understands, you know, penetration testing. You can use these open source tools to do penetration testing of devices within your home. Okay, so yes, it is possible.
Okay, thank you for that. So with that, so I will pass it off to the managing partner of my firm, Cranton & Cranton Legal Advisors, to give us a concluding statement and a vote of thanks. So.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for spending your late Friday afternoon over a 2-hour period with us, especially it being a rainy Friday afternoon. I'd like to say a big thank you to our 3 panelists, Emmanuel JB of the Ghana Police Service, Superintendent, I believe, Mr. Ben Tego of Cybertech, and Mr. Desmond Israel, who had to drop off for a lecture that he needs to give. We've had a very insightful discussion. We've looked at the local scene and the prosecution elements by the police service and other agencies. Mr. Israel has given us quite an insightful understanding of the various collaborations that are required across various jurisdictions and how we can get over those with the mutual assistance agreements that countries have amongst themselves. And Mr. Tego, I believe we've even shortened the time that he needs with us because he could have given us much more detail given the experience that Cybertech has in this industry. So we will be posting the link for this webinar within, I believe, by Monday at the latest, we should have it. And you'll receive emails with various information that you could continue to connect with us at Cranton & Cranton or with Cybertech or with the Ghana Police Service or Mr. Desmond Israel. It has been a wonderful session. We have learned quite a lot. And to our speakers and panelists, and indeed to Mr. Jesse Heyman himself, our host, we thank you all for participating. And we hopefully will be coming back to you soon with another webinar on a topical issue. Thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Goodbye to everyone that joined us, and thank you all.